Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. What if I told you that the very first words ever written weren't in a book, but were pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus more than 5,000 years ago? It sounds like something out of a fantasy novel, but this is the real story of the Sumerian language, the oldest known written language in human history. Tonight, we're journeying back in time to ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, to uncover the secrets of this incredible linguistic ancestor. And now, before your mind drifts deeper into this peaceful journey, take just a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell. Imagine a time long before the pyramids of Egypt, before the Roman Empire, even before Stonehenge, right there, in the fertile lands between the Tigris and Euphrates River Zut, we now call Sadan Iraqi civilization blossomed. This was Sumer. The Sumerians were brilliant innovators. They invented the wheel, developed complex irrigation systems, built the world's first cities like Uruk and Ur, and, most importantly, for our story, they invented writing. So, why did they start writing? It wasn't for poetry or epic tales, at least not at first. The motivation was much more practical. Accounting, as their cities grew, so did their economies. They needed a way to keep track of goods, how many sheep were traded, how much grain was stored in the temple granaries, how much beer was given as a worker's daily ration. Yes, beer rations. Some of the earliest texts are essentially receipts. To solve this bookkeeping problem, they developed a system of wedge-shaped marks pressed into soft clay tablets. We call this script cuneiform, from the Latin cuneus, meaning wedge. These early clay tablets, dating back to around 3300 BCE, were initially pictographic. A drawing of a head of grain meant grain. A drawing of a head with a bowl meant to eat or ration. Simple, right? But this system had its limits. How do you draw an abstract concept like love or honor? Or how do you write down someone's name? This is where the Sumerians made a revolutionary leap. They started using signs to represent sounds, not just objects. This is called the rebus principle. Think of it like this. In English, to write the word belief, you could draw a picture of a bee and a leaf. The Sumerians did the same. The sign for water, pronounced A in Sumerian, could also be used to represent the sound A in a more complex word. This innovation was it transformed writing from a simple accounting tool into a versatile system capable of recording complex language. Now, let's talk about the language itself. What did Sumerian sound like? Well, we can't be 100% certain. But linguists have reconstructed a lot of it by looking at how later languages like Akkadian borrowed and transliterated Sumerian words. Sumerian was what we call a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. It's not related to Arabic, Hebrew, or any of the Semitic languages that later dominated the region, nor is it related to Indo-European languages like English or Persian. It's a true linguistic orphan, which makes it even more fascinating. It was an agglutinative language. That means it built long, complex words by stringing together smaller units of meaning, kind of like Lego bricks, for example. A single, very long Sumerian word could translate into an entire English sentence. For over 1,000 years, Sumerian was the language of administration, religion, and literature in Mesopotamia. Scribes, who were highly respected members of society, would spend years in schools called edebas, or tablet houses, learning the intricate cuneiform script. We know about their school days from tablets they left behind. Some even have teachers' corrections in the margins. or students complaining about how hard their lessons were. These scribes weren't just copying receipts. They were recording the world's first literature. This is where Sumerian truly shines. The Sumerians wrote down their myths, their proverbs, their hymns, and their epic poems. The most famous of these is the Epic of Gilgamesh. While the most complete version we have is in Akkadian, the stories of Gilgamesh originated in a series of earlier Sumerian poems. They tell of a legendary king's quest for immortality, his friendship with the wild men in Enkidu, and his encounters with gods and monsters. These tales explore timeless human themes: friendship, loss, the fear of death, and the search for meaning. They even contain a great flood story that predates the one in the Bible by a millennium. The Sumerians were the first to write down the human condition. But like all things, the era of Sumerian dominance came to an end. Around 2000 BCE, a Semitic-speaking people called the Akkadians rose to power. Over time, Akkadian replaced Sumerian as the spoken language of Mesopotamia. But Sumerian didn't just disappear. It achieved a kind of immortality. It became a classical or sacred language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. For another 2,000 years, scribes in Babylon and Assyria continued to study Sumerian. They copied its literature and used it in religious ceremonies. It was the language of high culture, of science, and of the gods. The last known cuneiform tablet was written around 75 CE, but by then, Sumerian, as a living language, had been silent for nearly 2 millennia. After that, the knowledge of cuneiform and the Sumerian language was lost completely. The wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets became an indecipherable mystery. It wasn't until the 19th century that intrepid scholars began the painstaking process of decipheration. They started with Old Persian, which also used a simpler form of cuneiform, and used multilingual inscriptions, like the famous Behistun inscription, as their Rosetta Stone. By cracking the code of Akkadian, they eventually found their way back to the even older and unrelated language hidden within the texts, Sumerian. It was like discovering a lost world. An entire civilization, with its thoughts, beliefs, and history, was brought back to life from silent clay. The legacy of the Sumerians is all around us, even if we don't realize it. Their invention of writing fundamentally changed the course of human history. It allowed for the storage and transmission of knowledge across generations, paving the way for law, science, literature, and history itself. Their base 60 counting system is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour. Their astronomical observations laid the groundwork for later discoveries. Every time you write a list, read a book, or check the time, you're tapping into a current of innovation that began over 5,000 years ago on a clay tablet in ancient Sumer. So the next time you see an ancient artifact, remember that it's more than just an old object. A simple clay tablet with wedge-shaped marks is a message from our earliest ancestors. It's a testament to the timeless human desire to record our world, to tell our stories, and to leave a mark that outlasts our own lives. The Sumerians may have vanished, but their words, the first words ever written, still speak to us from across the millennia. Have you ever gazed at the towering pyramids or the golden mask of Tutankhamun and wondered about the secrets they hold? The key to unlocking this ancient world isn't buried under sand, but etched in stone. We're journeying back in time over 5,000 years to the banks of the Nile River to unravel the mysteries of one of humanity's first and most beautiful writing systems, Egyptian hieroglyphs. Around 3200 BCE, as the first pharaohs began to unite Upper and Lower Egypt, a new form of communication emerged. It wasn't just a way to keep records. It was a sacred art form, a divine gift from the god Thoth himself. The ancient Egyptians called it Medu Neter, which means the words of the gods. And when you look at these intricate symbols, you can see why. Each bird, each reed, each geometric shape is a tiny masterpiece. For thousands of years, these sacred carvings adorned temple walls, monumental, obelisks, and the inner chambers of tombs. They told stories of gods and goddesses, celebrated the triumphs of pharaohs, and guided the souls of the dead on their journey to the afterlife. From the very first dynasty until the Roman conquest and the rise of Christianity, hieroglyphs were the silent storytellers of a magnificent civilization. But as the old temples closed and the ancient religion faded, the knowledge of how to read these divine words was lost, slipping into silence for nearly 1,500 years. The symbols remained, but their meaning was a complete enigma. So, how did we crack the code? The story is as thrilling as any blockbuster movie, and it all revolves around a single, unassuming slab of black stone. The Rosetta Stone, discovered in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt. This stone was the ultimate cheat sheet. It had the same decree written in 3 different scripts. Hieroglyphs at the top, a later Egyptian script called Demotic in the middle, and ancient Greek at the bottom. Scholars across Europe raced to decipher it. The breakthrough came from a brilliant young Frenchman named Jean. He realized that the symbols weren't just simple pictures representing objects. This was the crucial insight. Some hieroglyphs were indeed pictograms, where a picture of a house meant house, but others were phonetic, representing sounds, much like our alphabet. For example, the symbol for a mouth wasn't just mouth, it could also represent the R sound, and some were determinatives, silent signs placed at the end of a word to clarify its meaning, telling you if a word was a god, a city, or an abstract concept. Let's dive a little deeper into how this works. It's like a visual puzzle. Imagine you want to write the word belief. In English, we use letters. In hieroglyphs, you might combine a symbol for a bee with one for a leaf. Of course, it's more complex than that, but it gives you the idea. Champollion's genius was in recognizing this hybrid system. He famously studied the names of pharaohs, like Ptolemy and Cleopatra, which were written inside an oval shape called a... Since he knew their names from Greek texts, he could match the sounds to the symbols. And slowly, like a key turning in a long-rusted lock, the language of the pharaohs began to speak once more. So, who were the people writing these beautiful symbols? They were the scribes, some of the most respected and educated members of Egyptian society. Scribe school was tough. Young boys, and very rarely girls, spent years memorizing hundreds of hieroglyphs. They practiced on broken pieces of pottery or limestone flakes because the paper of the ancient world was expensive and reserved for important documents. Being a scribe was a ticket to a better life. It opened doors to careers in government, the military, or the priesthood. They were the record keepers, the tax collectors, the librarians, and the historians. They documented everything from the amount of grain harvested to the complex rituals for embalming a mummy. Without scribes, our understanding of ancient Egypt would be a fraction of what it is today. Their careful work has given us a direct window into the daily lives, beliefs, and governance of this incredible culture. You might think hieroglyphs were only used for grand, monumental inscriptions, but the Egyptians had different versions for different needs. The formal, artistic hieroglyphs we see on temple walls were time-consuming to carve. For everyday writing, like letters or legal documents, scribes used a faster cursive script called Think of it as the handwriting version of the formal printed text. Later, an even more simplified script called Demotic developed, which was the script used by the general public. So you had the beautiful, formal script for the gods and more practical versions for the people. But the magic of hieroglyphs truly shines in their connection to Egyptian beliefs about life, death, and the cosmos. For them, writing was not just communication. It was an act of creation and preservation. To write someone's name was to give them existence. To erase their name was to wipe them from history and the afterlife. This is why you see pharaohs sometimes hacking out the names of their predecessors from monuments. It was the ultimate act of vengeance. In the tomb's hieroglyphs weren't just decorations. They were functional magic. The Book of the Dead, a collection of spells written on papyrus scrolls, was a guidebook for the deceased. The hieroglyphic spells would help them navigate the treacherous underworld, overcome monstrous demons, and successfully pass the final judgment. The weighing of the heart. The words themselves had power. The spell for opening the mouth was magically recited over a mummy to restore its ability to eat, drink, and speak in the afterlife. The written word was a literal lifeline to eternity. As the Roman Empire took hold and Christianity spread, the ancient Egyptian language and its scripts began to fade. The last known hieroglyphic inscription was carved in the Temple of Phale around 394 CE. After that, silence. The meaning of the words of the gods was lost, and for centuries, people looked at them as mere magical symbols or strange decorations. But thanks to the Rosetta Stone and the dedication of scholars like Champlain, we can once again hear the voices of the pharaohs, the prayers of the priests, and the stories of everyday Egyptians. Today, Egyptologists can read hieroglyphs with a fluency that would make an ancient scribe proud. They continue to translate texts that reveal new insights into medicine, astronomy, poetry, and law. The story of hieroglyphs is a powerful reminder of the endurance of human culture. It shows us that even when a language falls silent for over 1,000 years, it's never truly gone as long as the desire to understand our shared past remains. These beautiful symbols are more than just ancient writing. They are a bridge connecting us directly to the minds and souls of one of history's most fascinating civilizations. I hope you found the world of hieroglyphs as fascinating as I do. Now, we're embarking on an incredible journey back in time, over 4,000 years, to the cradle of civilization itself, Mesopotamia. We're not just looking at pyramids or ancient cities. We're going to listen to the voices of the people who built them. We're diving deep into one of the world's first great languages, Akkadian. Now, when you think of ancient languages, maybe Egyptian hieroglyphs or even Latin come to mind, but Akkadian is a true giant of history. Picture this. The year is around 2800 BCE. The land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, what we now call Iraq, is a bustling hub of innovation. Cities are rising, trade is flourishing, and people need a way to record their laws, their stories, and their business deals. In Terek, it's a Semitic language, which means it's part of the same family tree as modern languages like Arabic and Hebrew. But what makes Akkadian so fascinating is how it was written. The people of Mesopotamia didn't use pen and paper. They used a stylus, usually a cut reed, to press wedge-shaped marks into wet clay tablets. This revolutionary writing system is called cuneiform, and it's one of the earliest forms of writing we know of. Imagine being a scribe back then. You'd sit with a damp lump of clay, carefully imprinting these tiny wedges to capture the sounds and words of your language. These tablets, once baked in the sun or fired in a kiln, became incredibly durable. They were the hard drives of the ancient world. And thanks to their resilience, hundreds of thousands of these cuneiform tablets have survived, giving us an unprecedented window into the past. Before Akkadian rose to prominence, another language, Sumerian, dominated the region. Sumerian is what we call a language isolate, meaning it has no known relatives. But as Akkadian speakers gained political power, their language started to spread. It didn't just replace Sumerian, though for a long time, the two languages lived side by side. Scribes were often bilingual, and Akkadian even borrowed a lot of words in the entire cuneiform writing system from Sumerian. The Hell Game Changer came around 2300 BCE with a legendary figure named Sargon of Akkad. Sargon built what many historians consider the world's first empire. He united the disparate city-states of Mesopotamia under a single rule, and with his empire. The Akkadian language became the official language of government, trade, and diplomacy across the entire Fertile Crescent. Suddenly, from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, people were using Akkadian to communicate. It was the English of its day, the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. After Sargon's empire, Akkadian didn't just disappear. It evolved. It split into two major dialects that would define the next 1,000 years of Mesopotamian history: Assyrian in the north and Babylonian in the south. These weren't just regional accents. They were the languages of two of the most powerful empires the world has ever seen. Let's talk about the Assyrians first. Based in cities like Ashur and Nineveh, the Assyrians were known for their military might and their vast empire. Their version of Akkadian was used to record the glorious victories of their kings, to detail the tribute they collected from conquered lands, and to write letters between generals and governors. When you read Assyrian texts, you get a real sense of a powerful, centralized, and sometimes ruthless state. Their royal inscriptions are full of bravado, boasting about battles won and cities conquered. Meanwhile, down south in Babylon, a different flavor of Akkadian was flourishing. Babylonian became the language of culture, science, and law. The most famous example, of course, is the Code of Hammurabi. This incredible stone stele, covered in beautifully carved Babylonian cuneiform, lays out one of the earliest and most complete sets of laws in human history. It covers everything from property disputes to family law and professional conduct, and it's all written in Akkadian. But Babylonian wasn't just for lawyers and kings. It was the language of scholars who mapped the stars and developed complex mathematics. They used a basics system, which is why we still have 60 seconds in a minute and 360 degrees in a circle. They wrote medical texts, astronomical diaries, and incredible works of literature. Perhaps the most famous piece of literature written in Akkadian is the Epic of Gilgamesh. This is truly one of the world's first great literary masterpieces. It tells the story of Gilgamesh, a legendary king who goes on a quest for immortality after the death of his best friend, and it's a powerful story about friendship, loss, and the human condition. It even contains a flood story that has stunning parallels to the one found in the Bible. Reading Gilgamesh in its original Babylonian form is to connect with a story that has captivated people for millennia. So, what did Akkadian actually sound like? Well, we can't know for sure. Linguists have done some amazing detective work. By comparing it to other Semitic languages and analyzing the way cuneiform was used to represent sounds, they've been able to reconstruct its phonology. It had guttural sounds common in Semitic languages and a grammatical structure where verbs were built around a three-consonant root. For example, a root like PRS could be used to form words related to decide, like I press, he decided, or purasu, a decision. For over 2,000 years, Akkadian was the dominant language of this incredibly important part of the world. But all empires fall, and languages can fade. Around the 6th century BCE, the Neo-Babylonian Empire was conquered by the Persians. The Persian Empire brought with it a new language, Aramaic. Aramaic had a huge advantage. It was written using a much simpler alphabetic script, and it was often written on parchment or papyrus, which was much lighter and more portable than clay tablets. Slowly but surely, Aramaic replaced Akkadian as the common language of the Near East. Akkadian didn't die overnight. It held on for centuries as a scholarly and religious language, much like Latin in medieval Europe. The last known cuneiform text dates to the 1st century CE. After that, the language and the knowledge of how to read its script were lost to time. For almost 2,000 years, the secrets held in those millions of clay tablets were silent. The rediscovery of Akkadian in the 19th century is a story as epic as Gilgamesh itself. European explorers and archaeologists began excavating the great mounds of Mesopotamia, unearthing entire cities and their libraries. They brought back tens of thousands of these mysterious tablets covered in wedge-shaped writing. At first, no one had a clue what they said. Scholars like Henry Rawlinson, Edouard G. Hinks, and Jules Hoport worked tirelessly, comparing texts and using multilingual inscriptions, like the Behistun inscription of Darius the Great as the Rosetta Stone. Piece by piece, they cracked the wedge-shaped script began to give up its secrets, and the voice of Akkadian, voice of Sargon, of Hammurabi, of the Assyrian kings and Babylonian astronomers could be heard once again. The decipherment of cuneiform was a monumental achievement that opened up a whole new understanding of human history. We suddenly had access to the daily lives, the legal systems, the scientific knowledge, and the epic stories of a civilization that had been silent for millennia. Today, the study of Akkadian is alive and well. Scholars, called Assyriologists, continue to translate and study these ancient texts, constantly revealing new insights into our shared past. Every tablet, whether it's a king's decree or a simple receipt for a goat, adds another piece to the puzzle of ancient Mesopotamia. So, the next time you look at a clock or a map of a rock, remember the Akkadian language. Remember the scribes pressing wedges into clay, the empires that rose and fell to its sounds, and the epic tales and scientific breakthroughs it recorded. It's a language that shaped the world in ways we're still discovering, a true testament to the enduring power of the written word. What if I told you there's a lost language, a key to a powerful ancient civilization that we've only just begun to understand, a language spoken for over 3,000 years, right next door to the mighty empires of Mesopotamia and Persia. Yet it remains one of history's greatest puzzles. We're journeying back in time to the dusty plains of southwestern Iran to uncover the secrets of the Elamites and their fascinating, enigmatic language. So, who were picture this. It's around 2700 BCE, long before the Roman Empire, even before the Great Pyramids of Giza reached their full glory. In the region we now know as Kushistan in southwestern Iran, a powerful civilization was flourishing. This was the land of Elam. They were contemporaries of the Sumerians and Akkadians in Mesopotamia. And they weren't just quiet neighbors. They were a major political and cultural force with sophisticated cities, a powerful army, and a rich artistic tradition. And at the heart of their unique identity was their language, Elam. What makes Elamite so special? Well, for starters, it's what linguists call a language isolate. This means we haven't found any confirmed relatives, It's not related to the Semitic languages of its neighbors, like Akkadian, nor is it related to the Indo-European languages that would later dominate the region, like Old Persian. Elamite stands alone, a solitary branch on the vast family tree of human language. This isolation makes it incredibly challenging to study, but also immensely valuable for understanding the deep linguistic diversity of the ancient world. It's a linguistic ghost, whispering tales of a world we can barely imagine. Now, how do you write a language that has no relatives? The Elamites were resourceful. Their first attempt, around the 3rd millennium BCE, was a script called Proto. It's one of the oldest undeciphered writing systems in the world. We have thousands of tablets covered in these strange, abstract symbols, but we can only guess at what they mean. They seem to be mostly administrative lists of goods, livestock, and laborers. We can tell they're counting things, but what those things are remains a mystery. It's like finding an ancient accountant's ledger, but you can't read any of the labels. Then, for a brief period, they experimented with another script called Linea Elam. This one is also incredibly rare and has been a subject of intense debate for decades. It was considered However, in recent years, some scholars, most notably Francois de Sète, have claimed a major breakthrough, suggesting they have finally cracked the code. Their proposed decipherment suggests it was a syllabic script, where symbols represent syllables rather than single sounds. If this is confirmed, it would be a monumental achievement, opening a new window into the earliest periods of Elamite history. Imagine being able to read the words of people who lived over 4,000 years ago for the very first time, but the story of Elamite writing doesn't end there. As the influence of neighboring Mesopotamia grew, the Elamites did something very practical. They adopted cuneiform. You've probably seen cuneiformats, that distinctive wedge-shaped writing pressed into clay tablets. But here's the clever part. They didn't just start writing Akkadian. They adapted the cuneiform script to write their own, completely different language. This is like trying to write English using Chinese characters. It's a tricky process, and the Elamites had to be creative, using a mix of syllabic signs and logogram symbols that represent a whole word. This Elamite cuneiform is the version of the language we can read best, and it's our primary source for understanding Elamite grammar, vocabulary, and culture. So, what have we learned from these cuneiform texts? A lot, actually. Most of our knowledge comes from the Achaemenid Empire, the Persian Empire founded by Cyrus the Great around 550 BC. The Achaemenids were multilingual and on their grand monuments, like the famous Behistun inscription. They carved their proclamations in 3 languages: Old Persian, Babylonian, a dialect of Akkadian, and Elam. This was a huge deal for linguists. The Behistun inscription was to Elamite what the Rosetta Stone was to Egyptian hieroglyphs. Because Old Persian and Babylonian were already understood, scholars could use them as a key to unlock the Elamite text. It was like having a dictionary carved into a mountainside. These trilingual inscriptions show us that Elamite was still an important administrative language, even after the Elamite kingdom itself had failed. Think of it like Latin, in medieval Europe, a language of administration and scholarship. Long after the Roman Empire had fallen, the Persians were using Elamite scribes to run their massive empire, which tells you a lot about the respect they had for Elamite bureaucracy and tradition. These texts are mostly royal decrees, building dedications, and administrative records. We have thousands of administrative tablets from the Persian capital of Persepolis, detailing payments and rations to workers, which give us a fascinating ground-level view of the empire's economy. all written in From these texts, we can piece together what the language was like. Elamite was an agglutinative language. That's a fancy term meaning it builds words by gluing on prefixes and suffixes, with each piece adding a specific layer of meaning. A good modern example is Turkish. This is very different from a language like English. For instance, in Elamite, you could take a verb root and add suffixes to indicate who is doing the action, whether it's in the past or present, and other grammatical nuances, all in one long, complex word. They also had a class system for their nouns, a bit like grammatical gender in languages like French or Spanish, but based on whether the noun was animate, a person or god, or inanimate, an object. Despite these breakthroughs, so much about Elamite remains shrouded in mystery. We have a lot of administrative texts, but very little literature, mythology, or poetry. We have the who, what, and how many of their economy, but we lack the stories that reveal their heart and soul. What did they believe? What tales did they tell their children? These are questions that, for now, remain unanswered. The language seems to have slowly fallen out of use after the conquests of Alexander the Great in the 330s BCE, as Greek became the new language of power and administration in the region. By the turn of the millennium, the whispers of Elamite had faded into silence, replaced by new tongues. The quest to understand Elamite is a perfect example of the detective work that is historical linguistics. It involves piecing together fragments, comparing scripts, and making educated guesses based on scraps of evidence. Every deciphered tablet adds another piece to the puzzle, bringing the world of this ancient and powerful civilization just a little bit closer. The potential decipherment of linear Elamite could revolutionize the field, pushing our understanding of Elamite history back by nearly 1,000 years. It's a reminder that history is not a closed book. It's a living, breathing field of study when new discoveries can change everything we thought we knew. The story of the Elamite language is a story of resilience, adaptation, and eventual silence. It's a testament to a unique culture that thrived for millennia, leaving behind a linguistic puzzle that continues to challenge and fascinate us to this day. It reminds us that our world was once filled with a kaleidoscope of languages, many of which are now lost forever. By studying languages like Elamite, we don't just learn about grammar and vocabulary. We honor the memory of an entire civilization. What other lost languages or ancient mysteries would you like to explore? Let me know down in the comments. Now, we're embarking on an incredible linguistic journey, traveling back in time nearly 4,000 years. We're not just going to ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia. We're heading to the heart of modern-day Turkey, to the Anatolian Plateau, to uncover the secrets of a powerful empire and its fascinating language. Ever heard of the Trojan War? The epic clash between the Greeks and the Trojans. While Homer's Iliad tells the Greek side of the story, the Hittites were the regional superpower at the time, and their records offer a completely different perspective on the world of the late Bronze Age. But for centuries, their voice was silent. Their empire crumbled, their cities were abandoned, and their language vanished, buried under layers of dirt and time. It wasn't until the early 20th century that scholars stumbled upon thousands of clay tablets in the ruins of the Hittite capital, Hattusili. The script was a form of cuneiform, familiar from Mesopotamia, but the language itself was a complete mystery. The race to decipher it was on. Imagine the excitement when, in 1915, a Czech scholar named Bedřich Rosner stood before the German Oriental Society and announced he had cracked the code. He read a sentence from one of the tablets, "New Nindan is Waterma Ekotini." He then declared its meaning, Now you will eat bread, then you will drink water. The astonishing part wasn't just the translation, but the words themselves. Ninda was spread. Parizatini sounded a lot like the Germanisen or the English eat. And water was unmistakably similar to the English water or the German Wasser. The room was stunned. Rosner had just proven that Hittite was an Indo-European language. This was a bombshell discovery. The Indo-European language family includes most of the languages spoken in Europe today, from English and Spanish to Russian and Greek, as well as many in Iran and northern India. Linguists had long theorized that these languages all descended from a single prehistoric ancestor called Proto. But until the decipherment of Hittite, the oldest written evidence we had was from ancient Greek and Sanskrit, dating back to around 800 to 1500 BCE Hittite texts. Dating to around 1600 BCE pushed that timeline back by centuries. It was like finding a long-lost great-great-great-uncle you never knew you had, giving us an unprecedented glimpse into a much earlier stage of our shared linguistic heritage. So, what makes Hittite so special, besides its age? It's what linguists call an Anatolian language, a branch of the Indo-European family that seems to have split off much earlier than all the others. This makes it incredibly valuable for reconstructing what Proto-Indo-European might have sounded like. One of the most famous theories it helped confirm is the laryngeal theory. Linguists had noticed strange vowel patterns in languages like Greek and Latin, and hypothesized that Proto-Indo-European had some mysterious throat-clearing sounds, which they called laryngeals. These sounds had disappeared from all known daughter languages, but they left behind clues, like echoes. And then came Hittite. In the Hittite script, right where the theory predicted these lost sounds should be, there were consonant signs representing guttural sounds exactly as predicted. It was a stunning confirmation of a theory that had been debated for decades. It was like a physicist predicting a new particle, and then a particle accelerator finally finding it. Studying the Hittite language also opens a window into their culture and society. We have their laws, their treaties, their myths, and even personal letters from the royal family. The Hittite law code, for instance, is fascinating. Unlike the eye for an eye principle of Hammurabi's code, Hittite law often focused on restitution. If your ox gored someone else's ox, you didn't lose your own ox. You paid for the damages. This suggests a society that was perhaps more pragmatic and less focused on retribution. We have detailed records of their diplomacy, like the famous Treaty of Kadesh, a peace treaty signed with the Egyptian pharaoh Ramesses the Great. We have the original clay tablet, a testament to ancient international relations. We also get to read their stories. They had myths about storm gods battling sea serpents, vanishing gods whose absence caused chaos on earth, and epic tales of kings and conquests. One of the most famous is the Anita text, which reads like a personal memoir of an early king boasting about his victories. It's one of the earliest examples of historical narrative in any Indo-European language. These texts aren't just dry records. They are filled with human drama, belief, and ambition. They show us a people who were powerful warriors, skilled diplomats, and deeply religious. But what happened to them? Around 1200 BCE, a period historians call the Late Bronze Age collapse, the Hittite Empire, along with many other great civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean, suddenly disintegrated. Cities were burned, trade routes were cut, and literacy vanished. The Hittite language, once the tongue of kings and scribes, fell silent. For over 3,000 years, the world forgot it ever existed. Smaller kingdoms speak in related Anatolian languages like Luwian and Lycian, survived for a few more centuries, but eventually they too were replaced by Greek and other languages. The Anatolian branch of the Indo-European family tree withered and died out completely. The rediscovery of Hittite is a powerful reminder of how much of our human story can be lost, and how exciting it is when we find it again. It is a testament to the patient work of archaeologists and linguists who piece together our past from broken tablets and forgotten words. Every translated sentence is a voice from the past, speaking to us across millennia. It connects us to the Bronze Age, not just through ruins and artifacts, but through the very structure of their thoughts, expressed in a language that is both alien and strangely familiar. It shows us that the roots of our own words, the words you and I are using right now, run deeper than we could ever imagine, connecting us to the world of chariot armies and mighty empires. It's incredible to think about the stories that still lie buried, waiting to be deciphered. Now, we're embarking on an incredible journey thousands of years into the past, to the banks of the Yellow River in ancient China. We're going to uncover the secrets of one of the world's most ancient written languages, Old Chinese, and our guides on this adventure. They're not ancient scrolls or dusty books, but something far more mystical. Oracle bones. Imagine you're a king during the Shang dynasty around 1250 BCE. Your world is filled with uncertainty. Will the harvest be bountiful? Will your armies be victorious in battle? Will the queen give birth to a healthy son? To find answers, you wouldn't consult an advisor. You'd consult the spirits of your ancestors and the gods. And the medium for this communication was bone. This is where our story begins. Diviners, who were powerful figures in the Shang court, would take either the plastrons, the flat underbelly of a tortoise shell, or the scapula, the shoulder blade of an ox. They would meticulously carve questions onto these bones. These weren't just simple scratches. This was the birth of writing in China. Each character was a pictograph, a tiny drawing representing an object or an idea. The questions covered every aspect of royal life. Will it rain tomorrow? Is it an auspicious day to go hunting? Will the upcoming 10-day week be free of disaster? After the question was inscribed, the real ritual began. The diviner would apply a heated bronze rod or a burning stick to small hollows drilled into the back of the bone. The intense heat would cause the bone to crack, creating a sharp pull sound, which is thought to be the origin of the modern Chinese word for divination, bu. These cracks were not random. They were believed to be the replies from the spirit world. The diviner, and sometimes the king himself, would interpret the patterns of these cracks to determine the answer yes or no, auspicious or inauspicious. Afterwards, they would often carve the interpretation and sometimes even the eventual outcome right next to the original question. For example, a bone might have the question, will it rain? Then the interpretation, the cracks say it will. And finally, a note saying, it did indeed rain on the 5th day. These oracle bones are more than just fortune-telling tools. They are a direct window into the minds and the world of the Shang people. They give us a priceless, unfiltered look at their anxieties, their beliefs, and their daily routines. They tell us about their military campaigns, their royal lineages, their agricultural practices, and even their medical concerns, like the king's toothaches. For linguists, these inscriptions are pure gold. They are the earliest known body of Chinese writing. The characters, known as oracle bone script or Jiaguan, are the direct ancestors of modern Chinese characters. When you look at them, you can sometimes see the resemblance. The character for horse, Ma, clearly looks like a horse with its mane and legs. The character for sun, is a circle with a dot in the middle. Seeing these ancient forms helps us understand how a character has evolved over 3,000 years. It's like looking at a family album and seeing the baby picture of a word you use every day. The language they represent, Old Chinese, sounds very different from modern Mandarin. Scholars have spent decades reconstructing its pronunciation. They believe it was a language without tones, or at least with a different tonal system, and had complex consonant clusters at the beginning of words, something that modern Mandarin has completely lost. Imagine words starting with KL or S. It would have had a very different rhythm and texture. The discovery of these oracle bones is a dramatic story in itself. For centuries, farmers in a village called Shaotun, near the city of Enyang, would occasionally dig up these strange, inscribed bones. They didn't know what they were and called them dragon bones, believing they had medicinal properties. They would sell them to apothecaries, who would grind them into powder for traditional remedies. Countless priceless historical records were literally eaten. This all changed in 1899 when a scholar named Wang Yirong was sick with malaria. He was prescribed a dragon bone remedy, and just before it was ground up, he noticed the strange carvings on the pieces. As a scholar of ancient Chinese bronzes, he immediately recognized their significance. He realized this wasn't just random scratching. It was an archaic form of Chinese writing, older than anything known before. This discovery sparked a frenzy. Scholars rushed to Enyang, and systematic archaeological excavations began, eventually unearthing the last capital of the Shang dynasty, the ancient city of Yin. Tens of thousands of oracle bone fragments have been discovered since, forming a massive, complex puzzle. Piecing them together, scholars have reconstructed the Shang royal genealogy, confirming traditional historical accounts that were once thought to be mere legends. So, the next time you see a Chinese character, remember its incredible journey. Its story began not on paper, but carved into the bones of oxen and the shells of tortoises, as a question posed to the heavens by a king over 3 millennia ago. These oracle bones are a testament to the human desire to understand the world, to communicate with the unknown, and to leave a record for the future. They are the voices of ancient China, preserved in bone, waiting for us to listen. Have you ever wondered what the mother of many modern languages sounded like? What if I told you there's a language so ancient its words were considered sacred vibrations capable of shaping reality itself? Now, we are journeying back in time over 3,500 years to the northern Indian subcontinent to uncover the secrets of one of the oldest and most influential languages in human history, Vedic Sanskrit. This isn't just about old words. It's about the very origins of poetry, philosophy, and spiritual thought that continue to shape our world. So, get ready to tune your ears to the echoes of the past. Let's set the scene. Imagine a world around 1500 BCE. The great Bronze Age civilizations are flourishing. In the fertile plains of what is now northern India and Pakistan, a vibrant culture is taking shape. The people here, often referred to as the Indo-Aryans, are composing hymns, prayers, and philosophical but they aren't writing them down. Instead, this vast body of knowledge is being meticulously composed, memorized, and passed down orally from teacher to student, generation after generation. The language they are using is Vedic Sanskrit. Vedic Sanskrit is a member of the vast Indo-European language family, making it a distant cousin to languages like English, Spanish, Greek, and Persian. It's one of the earliest attested members of this family, giving us a precious window into what our shared linguistic ancestors might have sounded like. The name itself, Sanskrit, means perfected or refined, but the Vedic part is key. It specifically refers to the language of the Vedas, the most sacred texts of Hinduism. The crown jewel of Vedic literature is the Rig Veda, a collection of over 1,000 hymns dedicated to various deities. Think of it as the foundational text. Listening to the Rig Veda in its original form is a mesmerizing experience. It's not just spoken, it's chanted. Vedic Sanskrit has a musical quality with a system of pitches and accents that are crucial to the meaning and spiritual power of the words. It was believed that a mispronounced syllable could not only render a ritual ineffective, but could even bring about disastrous results. This incredible emphasis on perfect pronunciation is why Vedic Sanskrit was preserved with such astonishing accuracy for centuries, without a single written word. So, what did it actually sound like? Compared to the later classical Sanskrit, which you might have heard in modern chants or yoga classes, Vedic was more fluid and had a wider range of sounds. It possessed sounds that have since disappeared from Indian languages, like a distinct L sound that linguists get very excited about. The grammar was also incredibly complex. A single verb could have dozens of forms, each conveying a subtle nuance of time, mood, or intention. This complexity allowed the Vedic poets, or rishis, to craft verses of breathtaking beauty and profound philosophical depth. They weren't just writing about gods of thunder and fire, they were grappling with the biggest questions of existence. Where did the universe come from? What is the nature of consciousness? What happens after we die? One of the most famous hymns from the Rig Veda, the Nasadiya Sukta, or the Hymn of Creation, perfectly illustrates this. It begins with the line, "Then." There was neither non-existence nor existence. It's this kind of abstract, mind-bending thought expressed over 3,000 years ago that makes Vedic Sanskrit so compelling. The language wasn't just a tool for communication. It was a vehicle for exploration, a way to map the cosmos and the inner world of the human mind. The transmission of this knowledge was an art form in itself. Young students would spend years, even decades, with a guru learning to recite the Vedas flawlessly. They used intricate mnemonic techniques, chanting the texts forwards, backwards, in pairs, and in various complex patterns to ensure not a single syllable was lost. This oral tradition was so robust that when the Vedas were finally written down centuries later, the different manuscript traditions found across India showed remarkably little variation. It's a testament to the discipline and dedication of these ancient scholars. As Chimi went on, language naturally evolved. By around the 5th century BC, the spoken language of the people had diverged significantly from the archaic language of the Vedas. It was at this point that a brilliant grammarian named Panini stepped in. He created a comprehensive set of rules for the language, effectively standardizing it. This standardized form is what we now call classical Sanskrit. Panini's grammar was so precise and scientific that it preserved Sanskrit as a language of literature, scholarship, and religion for the next 2,000 years, while Vedic Sanskrit was the language of ritual and sacred hymns. Classical Sanskrit became the language of epic poems like the Mahabharata and Ramayana, of drama, philosophy, and the scientific treatise. But the legacy of Vedic Sanskrit didn't end there. It became the bedrock for countless modern languages spoken across the Indian subcontinent, including Hindi, Bengali, Marathi, and many others. These languages, known as Indo-Aryan languages, inherit a vast portion of their vocabulary and grammatical structure from their ancient ancestor. Words you might even use in English have roots that trace back to Vedic Sanskrit. For example, the word mother is matter in Sanskrit, father is pitter, and brother is brater. The number 3 is tribe. You can hear the ancient echo connecting us all. Furthermore, the philosophical concepts born in the Vedic era have traveled far and wide. Ideas like karma, the law of cause and effect, dharma, one's duty or righteous path, and the concept of yoga, meaning union, all have their origins in the world of Vedic thought. When you hear these words today, you're re-tapping into a continuous stream of wisdom that began with the chants of the Vedic rishis. By the banks of the Sarasvati River, studying Vedic Sanskrit is like being a linguistic archaeologist. It allows us to dig through the layers of time and understand not just how people spoke, but how they thought, what they valued, and how they saw their place in the universe. It is the key that unlocks the oldest layer of South Asian civilization and reveals the shared heritage of a huge portion of humanity. From the precise intonations of a sacred chant to the philosophical inquiries that challenge our understanding of reality, Vedic Sanskrit is more than just a dead language. It's a living tradition, a vibrant echo from the dawn of human consciousness that continues to resonate today. Have you ever wondered what language Abraham, Moses, or King David spoke? What was the original tongue of the stories that have shaped civilizations for millennia? Now, we're journeying back in time around 3,000 years to the land of Canaan to uncover the secrets of one of the world's most influential and enduring languages, ancient Hebrew. If you're fascinated by history, language, and the stories that connect us to our past, you're in the right place. Tonight's episode is special. We're not just talking about an old language. We're talking about the very voice of the Hebrew Bible, the Tanakh, or what many know as the Old Testament. So grab your metaphorical archaeologist's brush, because we're about to dust off the pages of history. Our story begins around the 10th century BCE. That's roughly the time of King David and Solomon. The location is Canaan, a region that today encompasses modern-day Israel and Palestine. The people living here, the Israelites, spoke a dialect of a larger family of languages known as Northwest. Think of it like a family tree. If English is a branch, its ancestor is Germanic. Similarly, ancient Hebrew is a branch, and its ancestor is Proto-Semitic. Its close cousins included languages like Phoenician, Moabite, and Aramaic. In fact, they were so similar that a speaker of one could likely understand a fair bit of the others. So, what did ancient Hebrew actually look and sound like? The script they used is what we call Paleo-Hebrew. If you saw it, you might be surprised. It doesn't look like the square Hebrew letters used today. Instead, it looks much more like the Phoenician alphabet, which makes sense as it was directly derived from it. This is the alphabet that would eventually give rise to the Greek, Latin, and ultimately the English alphabet you're reading right now. Yes, there is a direct line from the letters used to write the original Psalms to the letters on your screen. Each letter in the Paleo-Hebrew script originally represented a pick. For example, the first letter, Aleph, looked a bit like an ox's head and represented strength. The letter Bet looked like a house, which is why we get names like Bethel, meaning house of God. This pictorial origin gave the language a very concrete, grounded feel. It was a language rooted in the everyday life of shepherds, farmers, and kings. Now, let's talk about the sound. Ancient Hebrew had several guttural sounds pronounced from the back of the throat, which are less common in English. sounds like ayan and chet. These give the language a very distinct earthy texture, while we can't know for certain exactly how it was pronounced. Linguists have made educated reconstructions based on comparisons with other Semitic languages and traditional pronunciations that have been passed down through generations. The grammar was also quite different from English. For instance, verb tenses weren't just about past, present, and future. They focused more on whether an action was complete perfect tense or incomplete imperfect tense. This gives the language a different sense of time and action. A sentence could convey a sense of ongoing, unfolding drama in a way that's very direct and powerful. The most famous repository of ancient Hebrew is, of course, the Hebrew Bible, from the epic poetry of the Book of Job to the legal codes in Leviticus and the historical narratives of the books of Kings. The language showcases incredible versatility. It can be poetic, precise, and profound. Think about the opening of Genesis. Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. The rhythm, the word choices, all carefully constructed. Hebrew is a language that loves parallelism, where an idea is stated and then restated in a slightly different way to add emphasis and depth. You see this all over the Psalms and Proverbs. But ancient Hebrew wasn't just for sacred texts. Archaeologists have found it inscribed on pottery, seals, and stone monuments. One of the most famous examples is the Siloam inscription, found in a tunnel in Jerusalem. It was carved by the workers who dug the tunnel around 700 BCE, and it describes the moment they met in the middle. It's a message from ordinary people, a snapshot of real life written in the same language as the prophets. This shows us that Hebrew is a living, breathing language used for everything from royal decrees to workers' graffiti. So, what happened to it? How did it evolve? Around the 6th century BCE, with the Babylonian exile, the Israelites came into intense contact with Aramaic, the language of the Babylonian and later Persian empires. Aramaic began to take over as the common spoken language. By the time of Jesus, most people in Judea spoke Aramaic in their daily lives, though Hebrew was still used as a sacred and literary language, especially for religious study and prayer. The script also changed, adopting the square Aramaic script, which is the basis for the modern Hebrew alphabet we know today. For nearly 2,000 years, Hebrew was not a commonly spoken mother tongue. It was a zombie language of sorts, not truly dead, because it was constantly being studied, written, and prayed in by Jewish communities all over the world, but not the language of the street or the home. It was kept alive in synagogues and centers of learning. This brings us to one of the most remarkable linguistic stories in history, the revival of Hebrew. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, a man named Eliezer ben Yehuda made it his life's mission to bring ancient Hebrew back to life. As a modern spoken language, he tirelessly created new words for modern concepts like ice cream, bicycle, and newspaper, often basing them on ancient roots. He and his family insisted on speaking only Hebrew at home. What started as the dream of one man caught on and became a cornerstone of the Zionist movement. The result is modern Hebrew, the official language of Israel. While it's based on ancient Hebrew, it has been influenced by the many languages spoken by Jewish immigrants from around the world. The grammar has been simplified and the pronunciation has changed. A speaker of modern Hebrew could read the Bible, but it would feel a bit like an English speaker reading Shakespeare or Chaucer. It's recognizable but clearly from a different era. The journey of the Hebrew language is nothing short of extraordinary, from its origins as the tongue of ancient Israelite tribes. It became the vessel for some of humanity's most foundational religious and literary texts. It survived for centuries as a language of prayer and scholarship, and then, against all odds, was reborn as a vibrant, modern tongue. It's a testament to the power of language to carry culture, identity, and history through the millennia. Studying ancient Hebrew opens a window directly into the world of the Old Testament, allowing us to read the stories of Adam and Eve, Abraham, and Moses in their original form without the filter of translation. It connects us to a way of thinking and a view of the world that is both ancient and deeply influential. It reminds us that behind every translation there is an original voice with its own unique music, poetry, and power. I hope it's given you a new appreciation for this incredible language. In this part, we're embarking on a linguistic journey back in time to uncover the story of a language that shaped empires, was spoken by prophets, and even today echoes in small corners of our world. We're talking about Aramaic, a language with a history stretching back an incredible 3,000 years. Now, if you've heard of Aramaic, it's likely in connection with one of history's most influential figures, Jesus Christ. And yes, it is widely accepted that Jesus and his disciples spoke a Galilean dialect of Aramaic in their daily lives. When you imagine the Sermon on the Mount or the parables being told, you have to picture them spoken not in English, Greek, or even Hebrew, but in the rich, expressive tones of Aramaic. But the story of this language is so much bigger and more fascinating than that single, albeit monumental, connection. Our story begins around 1000 BCE in the lands that we now know as Syria and Mesopotamia. This was the era of the Arameans, a collection of ancient Semitic-speaking peoples. As they established city-states and kingdoms, their language, Aramaic, began to spread. It wasn't just the language for the marketplace, it was the language of administration and diplomacy. Think of it like this. In the same way that English is a global language of business and science today, Aramaic became the lingua franca of the ancient Near East. Its big break came with the rise of the great empires, the Neo-Assyrian Empire, and later the even larger Neo-Babylonian Empire, found Aramaic incredibly useful. Why? Because it had a simpler, more efficient alphabetic script compared to the complex cuneiform used for Akkadian. It was easier to learn, easier to write on parchment and papyrus, and perfect for managing a vast multicultural empire. So, scribes, officials, and merchants across the Fertile Crescent began using Aramaic for everything from royal decrees to trade contracts. This trend was cemented by the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which stretched from India to Egypt. The Persians adopted a standardized form known as Imperial Aramaic as one of their official languages. This decision catapulted Aramaic to international superstar status. Imagine official documents being sent from the court of Darius the Great, written in this language, to be read and understood by governors in far-flung provinces. This period, from about 700 to 300 BC, was the golden age of Aramaic, the thread that connected a massive swath of the ancient world. Because of this widespread use, Aramaic also became deeply woven into the religious fabric of the region. Significant portions of the Hebrew Bible, specifically in the books of Daniel and Ezra, were written not in Hebrew, but in Aramaic. This shows just how prevalent the language was among the Jewish people, especially after the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian Talmud, one of the central texts of Rabbinic Judaism, is also written primarily in a dialect of Jewish Babylonian Aramaic. It became the language of scholarly debate and religious interpretation for centuries. And, of course, this brings us back to the time of Jesus. By the 1st century CE, Aramaic was the common tongue of Judea, while Hebrew was retained as the language of scripture and prayer, and Greek was the language of the Roman administration and the educated elite. Aramaic was the language of the home, the street, and the synagogue. It was the language of everyday life. So, when Jesus spoke, he spoke Aramaic. A few Aramaic words and phrases are even preserved directly in the Greek New Testament. For example, Talita Kumi, which means, little girl, I say to you, arise, and famously, the words Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, meaning my God, why have you forsaken me? These are direct linguistic fossils, giving us a powerful and authentic echo of the past. After the 1st century, the story of Aramaic continued to evolve. It branched into two major dialects: Western Aramaic, spoken in the Levant, and Eastern Aramaic, spoken in Mesopotamia. It became the foundational language for the Syriac Orthodox Church, and a huge body of Christian theological and philosophical literature was written in a major dialect of Eastern Aramaic. Through Syriac Christianity, the language's influence spread far and wide, reaching India and even China along the Silk Road. Ancient inscriptions found in China attest to the presence of these Syriac-speaking Christian communities. However, with the rise of Islam in the 7th century CE, another Semitic language, Arabic, began its ascent. As the language of the Quran and the new Islamic Caliphate, Arabic gradually replaced Aramaic as the dominant language of the Middle East. Over the centuries, Aramaic slowly receded, becoming less of a lingua franca and more of a language spoken in isolated, often mountainous, communities that held on to their ancestral faith and tongue. So, does anyone still speak Aramaic today? The answer, incredibly, is yes. It's a testament to the resilience of language and culture. Though it's considered an endangered language, there are several communities, both Christian and Jewish, primarily in parts of Syria, Iraq, Iran, and Turkey, who still speak modern forms of Aramaic, often called Neo-Aramaic dialects. For example, the Assyrian and Chaldean Christians speak dialects like Syriac. In the small Syrian village of Malula and its neighbors, a dialect of Western Neo-Aramaic. The closest living relative to the language of Jesus is still spoken, though it is under severe threat. These communities are living links to a 3,000-year-old heritage. Their language carries the weight of empires, the words of prophets, and the prayers of their ancestors. Listening to modern Aramaic is like hearing a direct echo from the ancient world, a sound that has survived against all odds. It's a powerful reminder that languages aren't just collections of words. They are carriers of history, identity, and entire worldviews. The story of Aramaic is a sweeping saga of rise, dominance, and survival. From a tribal language in ancient Syria, it grew to become the connective tissue of the Near East, the voice of faith for millions, and eventually a precious and endangered treasure of human heritage. It shows us how languages can shape history and how history, in turn, shapes the fate of languages. It's a story that deserves to be told and remembered. In this part, we're embarking on a journey back in time, over 3,000 years ago, to uncover the very first whispers of the Greek language. We're not talking about the Greek of Plato or Aristotle, not even the Greek of Homer's epic poems. We're going even further back to a time of bronze-clad warriors, magnificent palaces, and mysterious scripts. We are diving into the world of Mycenaean Greek. So, picture this. It's around 1450 BC. The great pyramids of Giza have already stood for 1,000 years, but Rome is still centuries away from being founded. In southern Greece, a powerful civilization is flourishing. These are the Mycenaeans, the legendary people featured in tales like the Trojan War. They built massive citadels at places like Mycenae, Pylos, and Tyre, dominated the Aegean Sea, and traded with distant lands like Egypt and the Levant. For a long time, we knew about them only through archaeology and epic poetry. We saw their golden death masks, their intricate pottery, and their colossal stone walls, but we couldn't hear their voice. We didn't know what language they spoke. Was it an early form of Greek or something else entirely? The answer was hidden away, locked in thousands of clay tablets covered in a strange, unknown script. This script was called Linear B. It was discovered in the early 20th century by the archaeologist Sir Arthur Evans at the Palaeonossos on Crete. Evans found two scripts, an older one he called Linear A, and the more recent Linear B. For decades, Linear B remained a complete mystery. Scholars from around the world tried to crack the code, but without success. The script consisted of about 90 distinct signs, which suggested it was a syllabary, a system where each symbol represents a syllable like ka, te, or po. This was different from an alphabet, where each symbol is a single sound. The big question was, what language did these syllables represent? Many brilliant minds assumed it was in Greek, because the script looked so different from the later Greek alphabet we're familiar with. The breakthrough came in the early 1950s, thanks to a brilliant and determined amateur linguist named Michael Ventris. Was an architect by trade, but he had been obsessed with Linear B since he was a teenager. He spent years meticulously cataloging the symbols, analyzing their frequencies, and looking for patterns in the way they appeared on the clay tablets. He didn't have a Rosetta Stone, no bilingual text to help him. He had to rely on pure logic and pattern recognition. One of his key insights was noticing that certain groups of symbols appeared frequently at the end of words, and he theorized these might be grammatical endings. He started by looking at place names. The tablets were found in places like Knossos and Pylos. He hypothesized that some of the frequently recurring words on the tablets from these locations might be the names of the cities themselves. He made some educated guesses, assigning phonetic values to the symbols. For example, he guessed a common word might be Kianosophornosos. Step by step, a grid of sounds began to take shape, and as he filled in more and more values, a language started to emerge. And that language was, against all expectations, unmistakably Greek. It was a stunning revelation that sent shockwaves through the academic world. In 1952, Ventris, along with the classicist John Chadwick, published their findings, proving that the language of the Mycenaeans was indeed an ancient form of Greek. This pushed the history of the Greek language back by at least 500 years. Suddenly, we could hear the Mycenaeans for the first time. The clay tablets weren't writing grand literature or epic poems. Instead, they were something far more mundane, but in many ways far more fascinating. They were administrative records. Think of them as the spreadsheets of the Bronze Age. The Mycenaean scribes were meticulous accountants, keeping track of everything the palace owned and distributed. The tablets list inventories of goods, jars of olive oil, bushels of wheat, and large quantities of wine. They record livestock, hundreds of sheep, goats, and oxen. They also detail personnel, listing groups of workers like bronze smiths weavers, and even bath attendants, and detailing the rations they were owed. One famous tablet from Pylos describes the deployment of coastal watchers, dudes who are watching the coast, which gives us a chilling glimpse into a society living under the constant threat of attack from the sea. These records give us an unparalleled window into the day-to-day workings of a Bronze Age palace economy. It was a highly centralized, bureaucratic system controlled from the palace. So what did this early Greek actually sound like? Well, it was both familiar and strange. Many words are instantly recognizable to anyone who knows a little Greek. For instance, the Mycenaean word for king was wanax, which corresponds to the Homeric Greek word anax. The word for a governor or local leader was kasiriou, which later became the Greek word basa. We find words like duero for doulos slave, theo for theos god, and pomi for poimen shepherd. We even see the names of familiar Greek gods like Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, and even Dionysus, which was a huge surprise. It proved their worship was much older than previously thought. However, Mycenaean Greek also had sounds that were later lost in classical Greek. It retained an archaic sound, similar to a W, which linguists called the. So the word for king wasn't anax, but wanax. The word for wine wasn't oinos, but wono. This W sound disappeared from most Greek dialects by the classical period, but its presence in Mycenaean Greek solved many long-standing puzzles about the structure of Homeric poetry. It also had distinct Q sounds that later merged with other consonants. So, it was Greek, but a much more ancient, rougher version of the language we know from the classical era. The Linear B script itself wasn't perfectly suited for writing Greek. It was likely adapted from the still undeciphered Linear script, which was used to write the language of the Minoans on Crete, a completely different, non-Greek language. This is why Linear B has some quirks. For example, it couldn't distinguish between L and R, so the same symbol would be used for both. It also couldn't represent consonant clusters very well. A word like gnosos would have to be written as kai. Scribes had to be clever, and readers had to know the language well to interpret the texts correctly. Then, around 1200 BCE, something catastrophic happened. The great Mycenaean palaces at Pylos, Mycenae, and elsewhere were violently destroyed and burned. This event is part of what's known as the Late Bronze Age collapse, a mysterious period of turmoil that saw civilizations fall across the eastern Mediterranean. With the collapse of the palaces, the centralized bureaucracy that needed linear be vanished. The skill of writing was lost. Greece plunged into a period we call the Greek Dark Ages, which lasted for several hundred years. During this time, writing disappeared completely from the Greek world. It's a stark reminder that progress isn't always linear. Knowledge and skills can be lost. It wasn't until around the 8th century BCE, 400 years later, that writing reappeared in Greece. But this Jimmy, it wasn't linear. B, the Greeks had adopted and adapted the alphabet from the Phoenicians, a seafaring people from the Levant. This new system was much more flexible and easier to learn. It assigned symbols, not to syllables, but to individual consonant and vowel sounds, creating the world's first true alphabet. This is the ancestor of the Greek alphabet used today, and by extension, our own Latin alphabet. The old Linear B script and the Mycenaean world it documented were completely forgotten, buried under the ruins of their palaces, waiting for archaeologists and linguists to bring them back to light thousands of years later. The decipherment of Linear B was more than just cracking a code. It was like finding a new volume in the library of human history. It connected the legendary world of Homer's heroes with a real, historical society, and it gave a voice to the silent stones of their citadels. It tells a story not of myths, and legends, but of real people, of harvests and taxes, of gods and workers, and of a civilization on the brink of collapse. It's a testament to human ingenuity both, that of the ancient scribes who adapted a foreign script to their own language, and that of Michael Ventris, who, 3 millennia later, unlocked their secrets. Thanks for watching, and now let the fire take you into a world of calm and dreams.